always believed that the woods... She was a woman in her late 30s. With blonde hair she kept pulled back in a simple ponytail, and a face that showed the wear of raising a boy on her own. Her son Tommy was 8 years old, with brown hair that fell across his forehead, and eyes that still held wonder despite their modest circumstances. That autumn afternoon they had gone for a walk among the pine trees, something they did when money was too tight for anything else. Tommy wore his favorite blue hoodie, the one with a small tear in the sleeve that Margaret kept meaning to mend. He ran ahead on the familiar path, his backpack bouncing. Then they heard it. A muffled sound, barely audible beneath the carpet of fallen needles. "Mom, wait!" Tommy called out, his voice uncertain. Margaret hurried to where her son had stopped. There, partially concealed by overturned earth and broken branches, was a man. He was perhaps in his mid-40s, with dark hair and a beard, wearing what had once been an expensive suit, now covered in dirt and torn at the seams. His face bore cuts and bruises, and he was struggling to breathe. Without hesitation, Margaret dropped to her knees beside him. "Tommy, help me clear this dirt away. Carefully now." Together, mother and son worked to free the man from the shallow grave someone had left him in. Margaret's hands trembled as she brushed soil from his face, her mind racing with questions she didn't voice in front of her son. The man's eyes fluttered open. He looked at Margaret with an expression she would remember for the rest of her life. Not gratitude, not yet, something deeper. Recognition, perhaps, of humanity itself. "You're safe now," Margaret said softly, the way she spoke to Tommy during thunderstorms. "We've got you." The man tried to speak, his voice barely a whisper. Margaret leaned closer, and what he said made her pause. "Please." "Don't call the police. Not yet." Tommy looked at his mother with wide eyes. Margaret felt her heart quicken. Every instinct told her this was a moment that would change something, though she didn't know what. "We need to get you help," she said gently. "I know," the man whispered. "But please, trust me, just for now." There was something in his eyes. Not danger. Desperation, yes, but also a strange kind of honesty. Margaret made a decision that went against all practical wisdom. She nodded. With Tommy's help, she managed to get the man to his feet. He was tall and clearly had been strong before whatever had happened to him. They half-carried him back to their small house. A 20-minute walk that felt like an hour. Inside, Margaret settled him on their worn couch. Tommy brought water and a clean towel without being asked. The man drank slowly, his hands shaking. "My name is Richard," he said finally. "Richard Hartwell." Margaret cleaned the wounds on his face with gentle care. She had been a nurse's aide once, before Tommy was born, before everything fell apart. The skills came back easily. "I'm Margaret. This is my son, Tommy." Richard looked at the small living room, the furniture that had seen better days. The stack of bills on the side table Margaret hadn't meant to leave visible. The boys' school papers, held by magnets on the refrigerator. In the adjoining kitchen. "Why did you help me?" he asked. Margaret paused in her work. "It was a good question. Because you needed help," she said simply. That's reason enough. Over the next few hours, as daylight faded beyond their windows, Richard's story emerged in quiet fragments. He was indeed wealthy. The owner of a manufacturing company he had built from nothing. But success had brought enemies. Business partners who wanted him gone. The attempted murder was meant to look like he'd disappeared. "Run off with company funds? I don't know who I can trust," Richard said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "My own lawyer might be involved." Tommy sat cross-legged on the floor, listening with the seriousness children sometimes possess. "You can trust us," he said with certainty. Richard's eyes filled with unexpected tears. He looked away. Margaret made soup from the vegetables. She'd been planning to stretch through the week. They ate together at her small table, an unlikely trio. Richard insisted he would leave in the morning, that he'd imposed enough. "You can stay until you're stronger," Margaret said. "The couch isn't much, but it's yours if you need it." That night, after Tommy had gone to bed, Margaret and Richard talked. Really talked. He told her about building a company while losing connection with what mattered. She told him about being young and in love, about Tommy's father leaving when the money got tight, about working 2 jobs and still falling short. "You have something I lost years ago," Richard said quietly. "You know what's important." "I know what I have to do," Margaret corrected gently. That's not the same thing. 3 days passed. Richard grew stronger. He made careful phone calls on an old cell phone Margaret had in a drawer, contacting people he trusted. A plan formed. He would go to the authorities, but with protection, with evidence already secured with lawyers in another state. On the morning he was to leave, Richard sat at their kitchen table one last time. Tommy was at school. Margaret poured coffee into mismatched mugs. I want to help you, Richard said. I need to help you. Margaret had known this was coming. You don't owe us anything. That's not why, Richard said. He met her eyes. You saved my life, yes, but more than that. You reminded me what it means to be human, to be decent, without expecting anything in return. He paused. I have a position at my company. Human Resources. It's yours if you want it. Real salary, benefits, security for Tommy. Margaret's hands trembled around her coffee mug. Richard, and this house, he continued. I'll buy it. Put it in your name. You've made a home here. It should be yours. Tears spilled down Margaret's cheeks. She had been strong for so long. Why? She whispered. Richard smiled, and for the first time she saw past the successful businessman to the person underneath. Because kindness should never go unrewarded. Because I'm tired of living in a world where it does. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. And because, in those moments when I was buried in that cold earth, I prayed for someone good to find me. Someone who would see me as a person, not a bank account. And that's exactly who appeared. 6 months later, Margaret stood in her own home, now legally hers, watching Tommy play in the backyard through the new windows. Richard had insisted on installing. She had a job she loved, helping people navigate healthcare benefits, using her nursing knowledge in a new way, security, stability, things she'd stopped believing were possible. Richard had become an unlikely friend. He visited sometimes, always calling first, always respectful. He was rebuilding his company with new partners, people he'd chosen more carefully. He'd testified against those who'd tried to kill him, and they were now in prison. But more than that, he had changed. He funded scholarships now, donated quietly to causes that helped single parents, created programs for his employees that Margaret had suggested, benefits that recognized them as whole people, not just workers. You taught me how to live again, he'd told her once. Margaret had shaken her head. We just gave you a place to remember who you were. Sometimes on autumn afternoons, Margaret and Tommy still walked in those woods, past the place where everything had changed. The earth had healed over, leaves covered any trace of what had happened there. But Margaret never forgot. Not the fear in Richard's eyes when they found him, not the moment of decision when she chose to trust, not the way a simple act of human kindness had rippled outward, changing lives in ways she could never have imagined. Tommy, now 9, understood better than most children. Mom, he'd said recently, you always say to do the right thing even when it's hard. That day in the woods, that was really hard, wasn't it? Margaret pulled her son close. Yes, sweetheart, it was. But doing the right thing often is. That doesn't mean we stop doing it. In the growing dusk, as they walked home together, Margaret thought about the strange paths life takes. How a walk in the woods can lead to salvation. How kindness, offered without expectation, can heal wounds deeper than any physical injury. And how sometimes, just sometimes, the world rewards goodness after all. Not because it has to, but because kindness has a way of calling to kindness, of creating ripples that spread farther than we can see, touching lives in ways we may never fully know. That evening, as Margaret tucked Tommy into bed in their home, truly their home now, her son asked the question he'd asked before. Do you think we'll ever see him again? Margaret smiled. I think we'll see. Richard, whenever any of us needs, reminding of what really matters. That's what friends do. Tommy nodded, satisfied, and closed his eyes. Outside, the autumn wind moved through the trees, carrying with it the promise of change, of seasons turning, of life continuing its mysterious, beautiful path forward.